Hi, I received a lot of questions from viewers concerning the voice of God and how do I hear it and how they should hear it. And I don't really like those questions. Like, I can't really give an honest and good and useful answer because I am pretty much a beginner in that. In many areas of my life, I don't really hear God. So yeah, I'm able to like have conversations with God. And I have a lot of videos and short stories on that, but I'm not an expert on hearing God, and I certainly don't believe in different points of like, yeah, you should follow this and then you will hear God. So I was a little bit reluctant to talk about this, but now that I published a book in Hungarian that is all about conversations with God, I have to answer those questions because they are getting more and more. You should definitely listen to the first video titled "You Do Hear God," because I tackle the most important lie around this issue, which is that you don't hear him because you think you don't hear him. And because you do hear him and he's always talking, the only question we can ask is that what is hindering us to see and sense and enjoy? So the sun is always shining. What is the shadow or shutter on our window? Or what is the block, the wall that hinders us to see that sun? What makes us unable to sense that constant communication of God? And I collected a few points based on my life and what I have seen, that which are the things that can hinder me in hearing God's voice, and it might help you. First point: your image and view of God and your identity. If we think that God is not always happy and not always satisfied with us, and you can make him upset or angry with you, it can make it really hard to hear him, because you don't always want to hear someone who can be angry with you, and you don't always dare to hear him if you are afraid that he might say something harsh or judgmental to you, or you don't want to get close to a person that has an explosive personality, who is sometimes nice, sometimes angry with you. So the ordinary view on God, that he is so sad about sin and so angry, and if you don't follow his rules and his requirements, you are in trouble. It can block you from hearing God's voice. It's the same with identity. If you think that you are just a sinner who struggles their whole life to get closer to God, and you feel like you are separated from him and all of that, you might experience some problems hearing him, because if you are only a little distant thing and he's so far away and you're so unworthy of hearing him, you might not recognize the voice of God many times when it is available, just because you believe that you are not worthy of receiving anything from Him. There was a season in my life when I learned a lot about my image of God and my identity, and I had to throw everything away that I knew of me, that I knew of God. And it was a harsh season. It was a really good season. And it made me more aware of God speaking. Actually, I was able to hear God even before, with a very bad view on God and of myself. But I was not able to hear like the really good things from God. Like every time God told me that you are the same as me, we are close, there is no distance, we are one, you are perfect, you cannot fall out of my will, of my grace, you are forever okay, I love you, I will never be angry with you. But I heard those things, I was like, oh, it's too good to be true. I am a bit suspicious. Let's put it on the shelf. So I didn't dare to completely believe those things because of my wrong view, wrong image of God. So when those false images of God in me collapsed or started to collapse, I was ready to realize like, oh yeah, those very positive things, those too good to be true things are true, that God is trying to communicate to me. And I might be able to take them for real and really believe them. So it's not just like, oh, there's something strange that I hear, there might be something true in that, but it's a little bit suspicious that it's too good. I could actually say that, oh, God is really telling me that this is who I am, that I'm always lovable and perfect. And I started to have a lot of joy in it. So I had to hear it from the outside. It was John Crowder who was telling from the pulpit the very same things like God was telling me. And I could never fully accept it when God told me. But when I heard it from the outside, it was like, oh, it was true the whole time. Like, it is really true. And if you want to learn about good God and about your true identity, I would absolutely recommend you to listen to John Crowder or Rod Williams or C. Baxter Kruger or William Paul Young, someone who has this understanding. I also have a playlist on that topic if you want to listen to me. A lack of understanding on grace and the gospel and the finished work of Christ may also have an effect on your ability to hear God. When I saw that God is not just gracious, but He is grace as a person, and He cannot be not accepting and not loving and not kind, and there is nothing I can do and nothing I should do to complement what He has done for me and what He's doing for me, and that I can completely rest in Him, then it had a lot of effect on my life in every area, but also it had an effect on my hearing, my spiritual hearing. So I was like, okay, then if it's like not dependent on me, then I can hear Him anytime and every time. If I do something wrong, I can hear Him. If I do things right, I can hear Him. If I mess everything up, I can hear Him. There is no expiration date on my failures, like, oh, I messed it up, so I can't talk to Him for a few days. It's like I'm inside His constant word. He's constantly communicating, and I live in that. And it made me more sensible to recognize He's talking through everything. If you're interested in those things, I have a playlist on that, but you can listen to the previously mentioned preachers. They have a great understanding on the gospel. So when you understand how much there is nothing to add to what God has done for you, what Jesus has done for you, it eliminates all efforts, and even efforts regarding hearing God. Like, it's not about your prayer, it's not about your fasting, it's not about your routine, it's not about the 6 or 16 points of how to hear God. You hear Him and you can rest in it. One of the reasons that we can't hear something from God is that we define how we want to hear Him. Like, we have all these silly presumptions as charismatics, like this is very spiritual when you have a vision or when you have a spiritual encounter or out of body experience. But if you just have like thoughts that are positive or impressions, it's just like for the beginners. It's the elementary school of hearing God. And when we want to be really certain about something, we want to experience something very spiritual. And sometimes God just doesn't work like that. Sometimes He said something in your thoughts and it's enough for Him. And He doesn't want to give another seal for that and another seal. Sometimes we have this obsession that God has to say it in so many ways before we believe it. When we cling to something, many times God resists us because He is not very much into manipulation. And if we play the game of manipulation, sometimes He steps out and waits for us to get tired of it and give it all up so that He can do the things the way He wants them to be done. So like, if He wants to communicate something to you through the circumstances, no matter how hard you try to see Gabriel reading to you from a scroll, you won't. And sometimes God just decides things like that, and it's not about your ability to hear. Don't judge yourself. You're not less spiritual if you don't have a certain way of God talking to you. It's absolutely fine to desire crazy things. I do have a lot of videos when I talk about crazy testimonies and experiences, but it is not a requirement or condition. It's a fruit. It's a byproduct. Crazy experiences are not the way to enter into anything in the spirit realm. They might happen. They are fun. They are liberating. They reveal something of God, but God can communicate the very same essence to you in completely different ways as well. And sometimes He chooses to. And some people are more prone to experience God or hear Him in a certain way. And it's all okay. We are not the same. So don't determine that God has to talk to you in a certain way. I've listened to many Sidrod, it's supernatural shows, and I love them. But sometimes you get the impression that for God to talk to you, it should look like that. It should be that crazy, or that wild, or that absurd. And it doesn't. There is an ordinariness about God's communication. There is a casual, everyday thing about that. Like, you live together, you wake up together. There is nothing like an event in that. It's the way you live together, you communicate. So you can drop your expectations on how he should talk to you. Sometimes you don't hear him because you are looking for a voice from the outside. God is inside. He's actually one with you. He's not just not far, he is not even an other than you. He is merged with you. It's like you are mixed. And when we look for voice of God, even if we look for it in our thoughts, we look for something distinct, something that is other, something that is unnatural. And God uses our thoughts just as the enemy uses our thoughts. Like, when the enemy speaks, like, he never shows up as Satan, like looking like an ugly monster. It happens very rarely. You just have the thoughts of like, oh, I'm a terrible person, I messed it up again, I'm never gonna able to love God, I'm never gonna able to fulfill my destiny, I'm a failure, blah blah blah. It talks first person singular. Actually, God talks first person singular as well. That person was so nice, he was smiling so kind, I really love him. It was so good that I could meet my best friend as a surprise, and we had a nice chat. I really love my life now. I'm so thankful for the things God has given to me. You have that thoughts, and it is God talking, not to you, but as you, in you, because he lives in you. He moves your mouth, he moves all the parts of you. Like, he experiences everything you experience. It's like there is so much no difference between you that when you think, he experiences your thoughts. And sometimes he thinks through you. So don't look for something that is so much odd. Sometimes God uses an outside voice, like an audible voice, or something that is very harsh, like a mighty angel appears in your room and everything roars, and it can happen. But this is not the ordinary way that you will experience 99% of the time. Even the people who experience the crazy, they have days and weeks and months when they just have the very ordinary ways of like talking to God in their thoughts, in their imagination. There was a time when I realized that God does not want to give an outside voice to me. And I was ministering at a youth movement, and there were thousands of people gathering to worship every week, and I was on the volunteer team. We were praying for people for all kinds of needs, and all the other guys were prophesying, and I was like, oh, I don't hear God that well, I won't prophesy. But sometimes when I prayed for them, I shared what I just received from God in the previous days for myself. Like, oh, I understood this from the goodness of God and that. And I shared it, And it was really touching people. Like they cried and all that. And I was like, yeah, how powerful it would be if I could really prophesy. It's not really prophecy, it's just sharing my little understanding. And there was a time when the leader in the youth movement told me that God uses the revelations you have. Many times he does not give an outside revelation, something that you've never heard. Many times he wants to give to people the very same things he has already given to you. And it clicked. Like all those times I was feeling like sharing something I understood of God, it was prophecy. And actually I do prophesy. It's not a strange thing. Like I do have it. And yes, it was awesome. I was like, okay, then I can do it. And I don't have to wait for a distant voice. Yeah, so it is that easy. Actually, sometimes it is deeper when you share something you have been deeply touched by than when you share something that you have no clue of. God does this sometimes, that you just let him flow through you and you have no clue what is going on. But there is something very powerful about like giving it away what you did receive and what had already transformed you. So drop the idea of the outside voice. Forcing is not the way of the kingdom. If you force anything or really strive and you really want to get a revelation, it can absolutely sabotage the whole thing. I'm talking about this because I'm really that kind of girl who really forces and really makes it happen, or at least I used to be. And it's so not the way of the kingdom. You are a fish in the river of God, and your natural environment is this water of freedom and lightness and ease and submission and surrender and no control. And when you want to force things and control things and keep things and want God to do the things the way you want, and want him to talk to you the way you want and tell you the things you want to hear, it's like dropping the fish into the desert sand, and it feels unnatural and it hurts and there's no success in it. Like the little fish tries to move in the same way it would move in the water, but he couldn't, and it hurts him so much. This is the same when you try and force and strive. The kingdom is incompatible with those things. And I had these moments many times, even when I was publishing the book, when I reached the end of myself and I had to realize like I have no control. And the more I tried, the less success I had. And every time I gave it up, the solution came. So this is the way of the kingdom. Easiness and peace and surrender. And if we go against the stream of God's river, we're gonna sense incredible resistance. And so if you try to hear God and you do everything to hear Him, stop it. This is not how things work. This is why I don't really like answering the questions like how to hear God, because it implies that you don't, which is an illusion and a lie. But it also does not happen by steps. Like if you do everything to hear Him, won't make the hearing happen. Actually, if you do nothing to hear Him, this is when you will hear Him. Sometimes He doesn't answer our question because there is no point in Him answering it, because we couldn't make sense of it. So sometimes what God is about to share with us is from another planet, from another galaxy, from another universe, and we could just simply not get it. And it's not like God is like, you're too stupid to get what I want to say. It's like, you could really not have any benefit from me telling it to you now. It would only confuse you. So please trust me that as soon as you will be able to make any sense of it, I'm gonna find a way to communicate it to you. So when I was asking God about like, which university to choose and what to study and all of that, I didn't really hear Him. And it wasn't because He was not interested. It was like I couldn't make any sense of Him telling me that you will be a YouTuber even if you are afraid of even greeting people, and you never talk, and you get an anxiety attack when you have a presentation, but one day you will go to TV shows and you will have fun with it. And this is what I have for you. Like, it would be only a burdensome thing. Like, it's not, sometimes it doesn't make sense that God shares what He has in store for us. And especially regarding our future and destiny and all that, sometimes what helps the most is simple trust and living a simple life, enjoying Him. And if He wants to do something crazy with us, He will open doors. It does happen. If you are lost in God, He makes sure that all of a sudden you will find yourself in the middle of His plans. So sometimes it's not the matter of asking and answering. We think like, this is how I can be in the will of God. Like, if I ask Him and if I hear Him and if I do what He says, that is gonna be the will of God. And sometimes no, it's not. It's like, you are at the steering wheel. Is it called like that? So you are at the wheel of the vehicle, and you are expecting God to give you instructions, and you try to follow these instructions to move the vehicle of your life the right direction. But God is like, I'm not about helping you out. I want to do it for you. So it's like, I don't give you instructions. I actually want you to take your hands off the wheel. I want to do the whole thing. I know the directions. Sit down and enjoy the ride. sometimes we have so-called filters in our minds, like our theology, our upbringing, our worldview, our traumas and pains that can very much twist the way we hear God. As I said in the first video, I believe that God is able to communicate to you no matter what kind of blockages or filters you have in your mind towards His voice. So He does solve it to make you realize what He wants to tell you, even if you have to visit some dead-end streets before you find the right path. But He will make sure He has your back, that you will finally get it. And it can be dangerous to believe like, oh, I have those traumas, this is why I don't hear God. God is bigger than your traumas, bigger than all the filters. So trust in His ability to communicate to you rather than your ability to hear Him. The only reason why I put this point into this list is that sometimes it's good to like question what we heard or what seems like we heard from God based on our filters. Like, do I hear it because I was taught like God would say that, or do I really hear it? Or do I hear this because of my pains, or is it independent from it? Because when you see that, oh, there is something else that shapes the way I hear God, you can just simply realize like, oh, it doesn't have to define me. Actually, I'm able to hear the voice of God without those things. So the only way I put this point into the list is that you might question the way you hear God in the best possible sense. Like, is it only because I want to hear that? Or is God really saying it? Sometimes Christians say that, oh, I don't have peace about something. But sometimes we don't have peace about things that are challenging for us or unfamiliar for us, or when God takes us to the unknown, we feel uncomfortable. Many times when God told me something that changed my life, it was something that I had zero peace about. Like, it was so out of my comfort zone. So just what we have peace about is not the most exact thing, and not the most unquestionable method of deciding whether we hear God right or not. So when I was at the John Crowder's conference, I was not having peace for the first time. It was challenging in every way. Still, it was God speaking to me. So yeah, these filters that we have must be challenged, and it's a good thing when they are challenged, and you can challenge them on your own. So sometimes I sense other people's communication and even God's communication through the lens of rejection. Like, they must be saying what they say because they don't want me or don't like me, or they think I'm stupid or inadequate. And I have to like see through it. Seeing it is not about justifying it. Like, oh yeah, this is the way I will be because of my trauma. it's the other way around. It's only because I learned it from a trauma and I'm free not to keep that filter. This is not what God originally intends to say it. I only perceive it because of this bad thinking pattern that is not me and that I can be free from. So yeah, God saw all of your filters, all the components of your ability of hearing Him, and regarding all the points of view, He knows how to make things available and sensible to you, and you can trust that. Sometimes there is no point in what we are asking, for example, because He has already said it in another way. Like, we love this confirmation thing. Like, oh yeah, God has to really give me another sign and another thing and tell me in another way and give me a dream and say it in another way. And God sometimes just said it, and He has done it, and it's it. And we need to put up with that. So if you have a deep conviction that this is what you have to do, you don't have to wait for Gabriel to show up in your room. Because sometimes God just doesn't give crazy stuff, as I said before. So don't cling to the crazy when it comes to hearing God, and definitely don't set the standard. Like, this is how God speaks when He really speaks. Everything that sounds less weird is not really God speaking. God speaking. God speaking through your voice is just as much relevant than God showing up in a bodily form, shining in glory in your bedroom. I'm not against God showing up in my bedroom at all. It just does not define my ability to hear Him. So I am quite skeptical of asking God for another sign and another confirmation. Sometimes those signs we are asking for have very limited, are from a very limited perspective. Like, we ask for, like, oh, if it's really God's will that this person would wear red next day, or sometimes we give like very easily so we want to have signs that can easily happen, that mean nothing, like someone shows up in a certain color of clothes. Come on. But still people do that. Or sometimes we give God an impossible sign, like, oh, a helicopter should land on my yard and take me there. It's like, it's not gonna happen. If you feel the conviction inside, God is not forcing you in a supernatural way sometimes. So supernatural and crazy things are sometimes to shock you, to make you aware, and it is not used for everyday communication all the time. If it happens to you, I can absolutely believe you, but you can't say that it is true of everyone on the earth, because it's clearly not. So they need to enjoy the most casual ways of communicating with God. So be careful with asking for signs. It's easily manipulated. You can read into situations things that God would never say, and it's also like it's also like dependent on other people's choices, and God just does not manipulate other people. This is not how he works. So your hearing of God should not be dependent on other people's reactions and behavior. And so I would say don't ask for signs. I know that it is biblical, I know that people do it, but almost every time I hear it, I hear something that is very twisted. So so be careful with it, but also you're free to do anything. Sometimes God does not say it because it will lose its meaning by the time he answers it, or by the time the answer becomes relevant. So I was asking God, like, what should I do with my life? Like, what kind of career should I have? What path to take? And I was like thinking about linguistics and teaching and interpretation, these three things, because I was good at languages. And I record videos in English, so it has something to do with foreign languages, but I ended up as a full-time minister by the time I finished school. And it has been a crazy ride since then. And God couldn't talk about that back then. Even if he answered my question, like, you should really study linguistics, it would become absolutely meaningless by this time. So sometimes we need to accept that his ways are higher and his thoughts are higher than ours. And if he does not want to choose from our options, he might have a way better option. Like, should I choose this or that? I really want to hear your voice. I'm so obedient. I want to hear what you want me to do. And God is like, I don't want you to do any of those, but I can't tell you because you think those are the only options you have. So think wider when it comes to God's voice. And when you don't hear it, it's not about you being far away from God. You're stupid, you're not a good Christian, you can't hear him, you're doing something wrong. It's none of that. And it's also none of God's faults. Like, he's not like disrespectful with your question or not caring enough to answer. He just exists in a higher realm, but also wants to wake you up to that higher realm. And sometimes you can't perceive that higher thing that he has in store for you. And sometimes that answer would come from that higher realm that is absolutely not understandable on that lower realm. Like explaining software engineering to an aboriginal cannibalistic tribe. Like, you can do that, but it will make no sense to them. If God stays silent, he has a reason to do so. So it's not always about your ability to hear. He communicates so much with his silence. You can trust that. Like, you ask something from God and you don't hear him, just sit and wait, because he's communicating something. It might be beyond words, beyond your intellect, but he has so many things to communicate to you that are not even close to language and words. And let him do that. So don't limit God into the realm of thoughts and sentences and analyzable concepts. He sometimes uses those things, but he's not much into them. He's way much more into communicating his nature, his peace, his joy. So sometimes he's like, yeah, you have this question, let me show myself, and then we can talk about it. So yeah, sometimes God has more important things than giving an intellectually understandable little phrase answer to your question. It's not because he looks down on you or says like, you are too stupid to answer your questions. It's like he loves you so much that he says, there is something way much more that I can give to you than that little piece of information you're requesting of me. Pain and anxiety can hinder us to hear him as well. I had a lot of mental health issues and it really made it hard for me to hear God. It also didn't completely make it impossible. Like I did hear him, but it was like a distant thing. Like I heard him beyond the pain, like as if the pain was a wall in front of me and I could only hear God speaking from the other side. I do say though that you can absolutely hear him in the middle of pain and anxiety. He still has the means to communicate with you in that. It might be easier without them in many ways, and probably your spiritual hearing will be more easy without them, but it does not mean that until you don't get rid of those emotional mental health issues, you won't be able to hear God. Most of the things I wrote in my books, those dialogues with God, happened at a time when I was struggling like really bad with mental health issues, and the only way I could like connect with God was like writing down his answers. I didn't even believe them. I didn't know whether they were true. I just had this fun game that I wrote down what I felt like he was saying, and now years later I'm like, it was really God. It is really true. Now I really do experience all those truths. But back then, it was a distant voice. Still, I was able to hear it. So don't limit yourself that you would only hear him if all the struggle is over. It's another lie. If you're interested in my teachings of mental health and how to get rid of depression, there is a Way Out series that I made on specifically that. It might help you. It's not on hearing God, it's about like letting go of all emotional baggage and just realize that you are actually free. As you are actually free. The link will be below. Sometimes you don't hear God because you try to manipulate him, you try to make things happen, and this is not the way of the kingdom. Sometimes God resists the proud. God resists those who are proud enough to control. Humility is giving up and knowing that he's able. I'm not. So clinging to things is also not the kingdom. Sometimes we don't hear God because we cling to things, like He has to say that, He has to say it this way, He has to say it in words, He has to say in a mentally perceivable way, and sometimes He doesn't. So I said it in many ways, but I need to say it again. When you really want to be in the will of God and follow the guidance of the Holy Spirit, sometimes God Himself tells you to stop. Like, you might have a good motivation that you love God, but God still says to you, stop the whole thing. Don't try to be in my will. You are in my will. Your very effort denies the truth. Don't deny it by your efforts. Stop your efforts. They are not necessary. Actually, they are blocking you. So if you really try to hear God's voice, sometimes the best thing you can do is stopping all the things you do to make that happen. Everything. Sometimes God told me to stop sitting in silence and waiting on Him, which I really like, and which is the most important way I connect with Him. But He said, you are using this as a tool to get what you want, as if I was a machine. This is not what I am like. It's not like you put in your efforts, you follow the points, and then you get what you wanted at the bottom of the machine, like a machine. This is not. There are those food machines that you type in the code and you get what you wanted. This is not how I work, God says. And as long as you try to make my kingdom be like that for you, I might step outside and wait until you get tired of it, and then I can show you how my kingdom really works. Fear can be a great hindrance to hearing God, like being afraid of Him, being afraid of what He might say, being afraid of I might not be able to do what He told me to do. And I used to have all of it. Sometimes He says something and you're afraid to do what He says. And when I was coming out of depression, God told me many things that I was afraid of, like talking to people, hanging out with people, walking up to strangers and sharing the gospel with them. It was all so strange and so not peaceful for me. And still, when I've done them, it was like some walls of my prison just collapsed. So don't be afraid to do the things God says, because He has your back. He won't let you break on the ground. He might let you fall, but He will also catch you. So it's not like you will fall and then He lets you splash on the concrete and smash into pieces. He lets you fall, you lose control, and He catches you. So don't be afraid of doing the things God tells you. But sometimes people don't want to hear God, including me, because I know that I'm not going to be able to do that particular thing. so I don't even want to hear it. And this is ridiculous, but so many people face this. Like, they feel that they might hear something from God, but they know that they are not ready to do it, so they sabotage their hearing. It's like, I don't feel like I'm ready to stop the whole queue at the grocery store to prophesy to the cashier, so I don't even listen to what God wants to tell this woman. And yeah, similar things happened to me a few times. And what God told me is that it's okay, you are where you are at. I know what freedom you experience at this point. There's nothing wrong with you. Like, I know that you are a 2-year-old. I don't expect you to lift lift up a chair on your own or do something like that is impossible for you. I'm very much aware of that, and you can learn your freedom. Do the next step you can do. I don't expect you to act like you are as free as you will be only 20 years later. Chill out. You're not disobedient when you are not ready to do something that I try to lead you into. This is a great fear about Christians. Like, if I hear it from God, then I should really do it, because then I waste His gifts, or I'm disobedient, or I'm a bad Christian, and why would He talk to me again if I don't do what He says? And we have all these stupid thoughts, and we even teach it to others so that they might have the same prison balls as we do. It's absolutely okay if you only listen to it for a few times or for a long time. God is endlessly patient. He waits until it gets ripe in you and you grow up to do it. So many times God tells me crazy things, and he doesn't expect me to do it immediately. He knows where I'm at. Like, when He tells me that, like, you would do this and that, sometimes everything in me is against it. And now I don't have any guilt or shame or condemnation about it. But what I do is that I tell Him, like, this is something I cannot do, and you know it. But I give you permission to work it out in me. You can convince me. You can make me free enough to be able to do that. It's all on you. It's all up to you. I'm ready. I'm available. But I feel like I can't do it right now with that understanding, with that level of freedom that I have now. So if you want to change me so that I would be able to do those things, I'm ready for you to change me. And it's so liberating. I refer all responsibility back to Him. And He is very happy with that. Like, yes, I know you are never able to do that. And yes, I'm the only one who can make those changes in you. You're right. I never expected you to do those things. God is not like the Pharaoh in the Moses story, when Pharaoh expected the people of Israel to do the same, to make the same amount of bricks without straw. Yeah, He knows. He's not like, you don't have that level of freedom, but I still want you to act like you had. He knows that we are just sniffing the surface, and we are just about to experience His kingdom stuff. And He's so endlessly patient. He's at least as good as we are. Keep it in mind. if you can be that good that you realize the limitation of someone else and therefore be patient with them, how much more God is able to do that with you. So don't be afraid to hear things from Him that are far off, that are uncomfortable, that you are not ready to do, that trigger you in any way. Just hear it. And this is the next step. And He knows where to take you afterwards. Fear is never a good guide. So when we're talking about the guidance of God, fear is the opposite of them. So as much you are able, don't follow the guidance of fear. And if you can't, just trust God that He will lead you into that freedom from fear. Sometimes God just doesn't tell you things because He wants to protect you from the condemnation and from the burden that would come with it. Like sometimes when He talks about something way higher than our current states or understanding, especially when it comes to destiny or future calling, it's like sometimes it's so far off that He doesn't want to talk to you. He doesn't talk to you about those things because this is not the next step. This is not what helps you. Sometimes He just wants to communicate His love to you, and He's like, yeah, there will be crazy stuff, but what you need for a couple of years right now is that you would see me as love and see me as goodness and see me as grace. And then some might crazy things happen. But if God had told me what He would do in me right now, which is not that big, but comparing to a suicidal girl, it would seem impossible. And I couldn't do anything with it. It would only put me into stress, even more stress. Like, oh, I should even do those things. Oh my gosh, this is so terrible that I have to make those things happen. It's so against everything I experience and know about myself. So yeah, sometimes He just protects us by not telling things to us. Sometimes we would do it. Like, if He told us, we would do it. Like, this is what you would do to me. Oh, I'm gonna start to accomplish it. And God is like, no. It's like, this is something I would do through you without you helping me out with it. And it still happens to me. Like, God shows something crazy to me and I'm like, oh no, I don't know how I would be able to do those things. Sometimes it weighs me down when He tells me something crazy and He's like, oh, this is not the reason why I told these things to you. It's not your task. It's something I would do and you will be able to participate in it, and it's gonna be all my responsibility. So yeah, it's not like He condemns us or puts any burden on us or expectation, but sometimes we put those things on ourselves based on what He has told to us. And sometimes He protects us from those just by not talking about that. Sometimes we don't hear specific information from God because He does not want to answer written information. Sometimes He only wants to give Himself, His love, His nature, His essence. He wants to give Himself instead of a piece of information. And we cling to our piece of information like, please tell me this or that, as if it was a test. There is this dotted line and we expect God to write something on it. And God is like, what if I told you that you passed all the tests and this piece of information you're requesting is irrelevant? And we think we need an information, and sometimes we need something else than an information. Many times we only need to know how loved we are. For a long time I never talked about future and destiny with God, because every time this thought came up in my mind, the only thing I felt that this time is not about that. This time is about you seeing me as love and as goodness and as grace. And I'm not gonna talk about anything that has any connection with you doing something. It's a time for you just being in Him, being in me. Everything connected to effort and striving or anxiety, even the possibility of any of them, will be cut in your life. Don't even ask anything related to doing, because I'm not gonna answer it. You can ask it, but all I'm gonna say is that I love you. This is the only thing you need to know. And it's like, oh God, but this is not what I want to hear. And God's like, but this is what you get. Actually, this is what you need. The biggest hindrance to hearing God's voice is noise. Outside and inside noise. Many times people ask me like, why do I not hear God? What should I do? What are the points? Please tell me, I would do it. I really need to hear God's voice. Give me a hint. And I don't like giving hints, but have you ever tried to sit in silence for a few hours? I don't say it works magic and you will hear God or you will hear exactly what you want to hear when you stay silent for a few hours. But a lifestyle of silence will definitely result in you being more able to hear God. It's like you're in a room where the washing machine is going and the fridge and the dryer and another machine and the TV and the radio is playing, and maybe there is a fly buzzing in the background, but you won't be able to hear it. Not because it's not there, but because everything else is louder. And many times all the things in our head are so much louder than God's voice that He is speaking, he's constantly speaking, he cannot not speak. We exist in his word. But if you keep ignoring his word and you make a habit out of ignoring his word, you might not be able to perceive it. And that is natural. Like if a room is crowded with all kind of trash, you might not have a place to put your perfect new furniture that is your favorite into that room, because there's no place for it. And God's voice require place and space. It's something that has your mind has to be emptied for that. And I really want to tell you this in a way that does not sound like effort or something you have to do, but you need to understand that no change will happen. Like God won't speak louder or more to you. Like He is speaking constantly. You just keep ignoring it. Not because you are bad or you don't love God, just because you are so used to ignoring Him. And you need to have a new habit of not ignoring Him for some time. I don't want to say what to do. Like, I don't have the steps. It might be very different in every life situation, but you need to know what is the thing that makes you more empty, what makes your mind more empty and silent, so that you might perceive more of God. For me, it started with 10 minutes of my time at the end of the day, when I was just listening to music or I was in silence, and it changed my life. I would highly recommend for anyone to do the same. These days, I love spending hours of silence, and if I'm not able to do this for days, I really miss it. So I don't tell you that you should do this or that, but it does help to create an outside silence, a silent environment, and then it's very great to create silence in your mind, like no attention to going anywhere, no attention of yours going anywhere. No thinking, no analyzing, no worrying. You just there. Even if your thoughts are still going on, but you are there available to God. And you might hear something. You might not hear anything. Still, God is communicating something to you in those times. So just give that space to God, in your mind, and sometimes in your time, and sometimes in your room. Like there is a place where I sit in silence at times. So it's not about what makes God talk to me. It's more like the question of what suppresses the voice of God in my head. And if you create a space for God's voice to be heard, He will communicate to you some way. And silence is His best way of communication. So don't expect information. If you want it, He might give it to you, but just be there and get used to the rhythms of heaven's way of communicating, because it's very different from the world. like everyone talking and shouting and all kinds of stimulations and everything is fighting for your attention. It's very different. It's very soft and boring in the best possible sense. Like there is not much movement going on. And so yeah, you might want to receive revelations in tangible things. You might have it. If you are hungry for it, go for it. But the things you can talk about will be only the top of the iceberg. The 10%. The 90% will be the vast presence, the absolutely not describable endlessness of God that is way beyond your mind, your concept, your information, your revelations. It has nothing to do with anything that can be told or taught. And if you give space to that communication of God, you will have the 90% of something that is way beyond your mind. And this is the best part, to be honest. And you might also have the 10% of like sharing crazy testimonies of what I heard from God. I do that. Of course, I enjoy it. I enjoy that 10%. But I need to admit that there is a depth of God that is not about words and not about thoughts. And this is the good part. So if you want to hear God, I would definitely recommend to have a lifestyle of silence. Sometimes people are like, oh, if it's the real deal, I'm gonna wipe out a whole week and absolutely no connection and not talking to anyone. You can do that. I won't advise to do something crazy when you have never spent an hour in silence, but I think it's more beneficial if you do something that you can do every day or very regularly. Like 10 minutes of your everyday would do it. And you can make it into half an hour or whatever, but just something that is constant, that space is always empty for you. This space is not distracted with something else. This is something that is just for your voice, just for your communication. Yes, so I really love silence, and I discovered a lot of things in silence. So I know that there are worlds of difference. Like it can be a completely other dimension. So many times my questions I ask at the beginning of the time do not exist at all after a few minutes of silence or after a few hours of silence. Like they don't make sense. They just evaporate. And even if I still need an answer, I'm able to hear from a much higher perspective. So sometimes God is not able to communicate something to me at the beginning of my silent time on that particular day, and the end of it, He can't communicate it to me. Because that silence does not change God, it changes you. It makes you empty enough so that I can receive God. So yeah, when God does not talk about something, He has a reason to do so. And many times this reason is that there is something more important than the answer you are looking for. You need an understanding of his love and kindness way more than those answers. Sometimes God is like, when I ask him, like, you should really tell me what to choose. And God is like, if you let me reveal myself to you, if you let me introduce yourself to you, who you really are, then you can choose what you want. And if you don't let me reveal myself, you don't let me introduce yourself to you, the true you, you can do whatever you want. It's not like God doesn't care or he's like arrogant, but he's like, there's something that is way more important, something that has another dimension of importance. And if you don't have that, that little piece of information does not really matter. So sometimes God does not answer our question because it is not as important as we think it to be. And it's not because he doesn't care. It's not because he's like, I'm the Most High God, your silly question does not matter. It's more like, it does not even matter to you. I absolutely feel your feelings and thoughts, and I'm compassionate, but this question does not really matter even to you, and you will see it very soon. I have a little nephew, and he is obsessed with all these superheroes and superpowers, and sometimes he asks me something like, if he had double the power of Spider-Man, then what would it be? And he insists that I would answer him, and I have no clue whatsoever, and I just tell him something, and like within a minute he forgets the whole question, the very question he was so obsessed with a minute before. And I'm like, isn't it just like me? Like, this question does not matter. Like, it does not even affect his little life, and he's still obsessed with it. So yeah, sometimes our questions are not as important as we think them to be, and sometimes they completely dissolve at the moment we let God show something of himself. These were the 16 points I have gathered about what are the issues that can hinder us in hearing God. It's not an exhaustive list, it's just some things that I experienced in my life as hindrance, and they might help you. The only reason I gather these points is that we will see that the constant voice of God is so available, so present, that anytime we don't cling to the things that cast shadow on that, and that cast shadow on us and makes us not see the sun that is always shining, we just realize like, oh, it is shining, and it has always shining, and it will always be shining. And yes, I hear God's voice, and I will always hear it, and actually I have always heard it. because it is constant, I only paid too much attention something that is actually not true, that is an illusion. So this list is only about like us seeing that the blockage we think there is actually there isn't. That the blockage we think that makes us unable to hear him is actually nothing more than a thought thing that we can ignore or don't feed or pay more attention to. And yes, it's like you step out of the shadow and you realize that the sun is very good at shining, and you are very good at enjoying that sun. You just stood in the shadow for some reason. You are free to step out of it and enjoy that sun that is always shining. Let us all enjoy the constant communication and communion of God. God bless you.